Hello, I'm Mark, and welcome to my channel. If you're returning, thanks a lot. If you're new, thanks a lot. Before I start, I'd just like to give a shout out to MJ at Reading This Life, a channel about books. She kindly gave me a shout out, part of the newbie tag, and it has helped, so thank you very much, MJ, much appreciated. I happen to be a slow reader. I've got various things on the go, and I bought this collection. It was really due to the fact that I wanted to get into world literature, and I realised, well, I need to also get back into English literature because a lot of it I have never read. This is the first volume, which I'm currently reading. If you happen to know what this is about, that's where I'm at, about 154 pages in. So far, it's been The Wanderer, Beowulf, interesting, and The Dream of the Rood. But the first ever thing that's been included is, I assume it's pronounced Caedmon. Could be Caedmon for all I know. I'll use Caedmon because I'm going to say that anyway. And there's a couple of things that are brought up regarding this very short, account. It's a story that's contained in the ecclesiastical history of the English people by the Venerable Bede. If you've never heard of the Venerable Bede, he was a monk who lived in the 8th century. I think he wrote around about the 730s to 750s in the northeast of England, a place called Jarrow. And he did a history of the English peoples, not a history per se, but the ecclesiastical history. So it's everything to do about the greatness of God and how he is part of the peoples around Bede's residence and place of work, where he lived. And part of it is about a guy called Caedmon. Now, Caedmon was a cowherder, therefore the lowest possibly within the monastery in which he was working. So you've got to imagine this huge organisation of monks and nuns, and he was helping, part of the pasture land and production of food, milk, no doubt. And occasionally there would be feasts throughout the year, and part of the way in which they entertained themselves, a harp or a zither would go around, and as soon as it came to you, you're expected to contribute to either the festivities by either doing a song or piece of music or reciting poetry. But Caedmon was supposedly illiterate, and he would tend to slink off before it ever came to him. Now, according to Bede, Caedmon went out to, where are they kept? The cows, the cowshed. And he has a dream. And part of the dream, he hears this voice telling him to sing. And he said, well, I can't sing. Now I'll just read this from the text. Gone to sleep, he dreamed that someone was standing at his side and greeting him, calling out his name. Caedmon, he said, sing me something. And he replied, but I don't know how to sing. And therefore he did sing. And it was noteworthy enough that it was talked about, written about by Bede. The quality of this so-called illiterate person's language stunned everybody. And it therefore begs the question, first of all, we assume that people who were so-called certain stations in society in the Middle Ages, if you were quite low down, you were never going to be able to read or write. But is that the case? Is it that Caedmon could read and write, but he didn't really want to show it because he was only a cowherd? Perhaps that would have put him into difficulties with those in charge. He's getting up on himself, trying to show off when he's only a person to work the land or animals and that kind of thing. And we can see that today, can we not? There are people in society who believe they should not be able to read or write or read certain books because it's beyond them. But anyway, Caedmon became well known for being, almost inventing a new form of poetry. And according to the account of Bede, Caedmon later became a well-known poet. Now, in itself, the poem or the poetry, I won't necessarily talk about. You just have to read it. But there's a few things that I would like to talk specifically to do with Caedmon's hymn. The first is the use of language. Now, it's written, I don't know if you can see this, it's written in Anglo-Saxon. I have no idea how to pronounce any of these words, or even the inflection. Nuskulon herigin. Okay, good luck with that. But in English, now we must praise Heaven Kingdom's guardian, the measurer's might, and his mind plans. That's a kenning. If you read literature from this era, there's a lot of kennings. For instance, if an author was to write about somebody moving over the channel from, say, modern-day France, or Gaul, as was then, to England or Wessex, they could easily have written they went across the sea, or they went across the water. But you may come across he or she went across the Whale Road. That's a kenning. And for a modern audience, you think, hang on, Whale Road? What's that? You have to pause to think about it. And it may then make sense. You may read something like the breaker of trees. Well, that refers to the wind or a storm. It's a playful use of language, which faded. I think Shakespeare must have been influenced by previous literature of his era, of which kenning was a large part, and it's this delicious use of language, which sadly we have lost. Although saying that, if you were to read the lyrics of, say, John Lennon in the late 60s, especially the psychedelic period, I Am the Walrus, Cuckoo Cuckoo, there's definitely use of, more playful use of words put in together to make some kind of an image. And it's sadly the case that is almost gone. One of my all-time favourite books is this, Brewer's Dictionary, Phrase and Fable. I first came across, not this particular book, but a version of it in the early 1980s. And it shows how certain words were then falling out of use, like hue and cry. Just openly, randomly choose something. A Lucifer match. It's a friction match which was invented by John Walker in 1826. It's just great. And we are losing that kind of language out of modern discourse and conversations, and it's a shame. So when we read things like this, it reminds us of the power and the beauty of language, which could be, especially with poetry. Okay, so that's the first thing. Kenning. The second, and it's actually written here by Bede, he said, but no one could equal him, this is Caedmon, because he was not taught the art of song by men or by human agency, but received this gift through heavenly grace. Of course, it was a monk that was writing, and he wanted to show that it was God's power, could do magical things, could take a lowly cowherd and make him able to do such beautiful poetry. Of course, the ancients knew this. I've got here the Bhagavad Gita, and in it, it's talking about the concepts that the ancient followers of Sanatan Dharma, what we call now Hindus, have this concept of a word called smriti, or that which is remembered. Shruti is what is seen or heard. What is remembered, the memory, is smriti. Plato wrote books in which Socrates is having I can't remember the title. Socrates is having a conversation with an old fella, and it's all about how we remember things. And he calls over a slave who supposedly in that place and time knew nothing. and through questioning, drew out the knowledge that was in this slave about advanced mathematics. And therefore said, haha, you see, we are born with memory, but we just can't remember it. It has to be drawn out. The Greeks also had a concept of the muses, and the muses would descend. And the muses could give anybody the gift of being a wonderful poet or an artist, a singer, whatever, without any previous training or knowledge. So is it the case that you yourself, I know I've done this, have been in a situation where someone's asked me a question and I think, oh, how would I know the answer to that? And then suddenly it comes to you. I know that doesn't happen for everyone, but it's happened for me and a few other people I know. Well, how is that happening? To this day, I didn't know where I got that information from. Could it have been I heard it as a younger person and then just brought up? Caedmon does bring up that issue about where do we get our knowledge from and where is this skill coming from? Is it a gift of God, or is it that we've always had it and it's just drawn out of ourselves? Little piece here, he said, when he woke up, this is Caedmon, he remembered everything that he had sung in his sleep. Now, I can only talk for myself, but I often, at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, got this fuzziness around the head, and I just can't stop thinking. And then the next morning, I just seem to, right, okay. Not quite like Joe 90, if you've ever seen that. I'm not saying it's a super skill or whatever, but it does happen occasionally. And Caedmon's hymn, for all its brevity, has brought up for myself that the use of language and where do we get our skills and rhetorical skills from. Some people do need training, but there are people that don't. It's just a natural gift for them. So I don't necessarily know why this was included, but I'm glad it was, or is, whoever put this together initially. And for all its brevity, all its shortness, how many lines is it? 1, 2, 3, 4? 8 or 9 lines in English. It's a very powerful thing to read because of that, or those 2 reasons. So, a good start. I guess when I come back, I'll be talking about the Dream of the Rood. Whenever in the future. So thanks for listening. Please, if you have enjoyed this, and I have to say, I'm doing this because of MJ. I don't like asking people to subscribe and comment, but supposedly I should. So comment, subscribe, comment, and give us a thumbs up. It does help. So thank you very much, and I'm glad to be in the community, and thanks for listening.